Hello. This is gonna be the third to last episode of my Biomes series, and this one is about the hot desert. So, as you probably already know, in fact, I would be nervous if you didn't, the hot desert is when it's hot and dry. Hot deserts are often referred to as subtropical, but this more refers to their latitude because climatically they are very hot and can only be considered tropical. This is because there's so little cloud cover and such high pressure that the temperature can skyrocket during the day, and it can actually get kind of cold at night. Sometimes you will have a desert where occasionally it can get 40 degrees Celsius at noon and -5 at night. This is very rare, but it can indeed happen. Now, there are a lot of plants that can survive in the desert, especially in the wetter margins of the desert, but even the hardiest plants at least need non-zero precipitation. So that's why in the wetter margins you will find things like shrubs, grass, and small trees. But in the drier parts, you will only find very sparsely dotted shrubs and grass. And in the driest parts, it's a complete moonscape. You see no plants, pretty much no life except for a few things hunkering down in caves where there is water. Plants in the desert have very long roots to go below the sand because sand is very bad at holding water and it will just fall basically to the bedrock. So the plants have to send their roots way down there and get the water from there. Let's talk desert oases. Oases are a source of water in the desert that does not come from the sky, and it is a safe haven for plants and animals, a lot, and they are often very crowded because they're the only habitable place in a large area oftentimes. And oases are still technically deserts, even though the foliage would suggest otherwise. They are not true deserts because desert describes a climatic region with similar plant and animal species. You might call an oasis or river in a desert a sort of pseudo-savanna or pseudo-jungle because the foliage might suggest, hey, this is a savanna or a jungle, but it's technically still in a desert. But the reverse can also happen. When you have an area and the foliage suggests it's a desert, but climatically it is not a desert, this is called a pseudo-desert. Examples are the Carcross Desert, the Bromo Sand Sea, and very high altitude regions. And the vast majority of water in any river that goes through a desert will not come from that desert. Think, does much of the Nile's water come from the Sahara? Nope. Does much of the Volga River's water come from the Central Asian desert? Nope, it comes from the Valdai Hills. Now, it's really hard to talk about animals in the desert without mentioning oases because the vast majority of animal life in the hot desert will be concentrated around a few oases. Some deserts may have significant wet seasons, which will allow animals to temporarily spread outwards or migrate from other regions. And that's a thing, but pretty much no animals really choose to be in the desert. because it's just too hard to live there. Although on the wetter margins, there are a lot of animals. Hot deserts, as the name implies, are found anywhere where it's hot and dry. This often corresponds to western and continental margins of the subtropical high, which is pretty sporadic and doesn't form a continuous line as the idealized models would say. But very rarely hot deserts can creep northward. In fact, the southern parts of the Central Asian desert are sometimes considered hot deserts. And the northern parts of the Atacama are also considered hot deserts sometimes. As you can see, there's a pretty big chunk in southwestern North America, as well as a little bit in northern Mesoamerica. There's a pretty significant amount in South America. There's a massive belt stretching from northwest Africa all the way to southwest Asia and western South Asia. Don't get those two confused. So, types of deserts. Semi-arid, which often overlaps with savannas and steppes, and most people, including me, don't consider it a true desert. Arid is what people often refer to as just desert. And hyper-arid is where things get crazy. Precipitation is sporadic, if any, even over months to years. In some extremely arid regions, precipitation can only happen once every hundreds, if not thousands, even millions of years. Now we have vegetation subtypes. So there is dry grass savanna, which is just any semi-arid hot region with grass, which is actually pretty rare because usually you'd find shrubs. Then xeric shrubland is just hot, dry shrubland. It can be cold sometimes, though. Then sand desert is where it's all sand and pretty much no vegetation, and rocky desert is where it's all rocks and pretty much no vegetation. A good example of a sand desert is parts of the Sahara, and a good example of a rocky desert is parts of the Atacama, especially Valle de Luna, or Valley of the Moon. Some parts have not seen rainfall in 400 years. On my cold desert episode, I'm not going to go into too much detail about subtypes because they're pretty much the same for hot and cold deserts, except instead of an arid grass savanna, it's an arid steppe.